All right, I'm trying this again. This is probably the third or fourth or fifth attempt. And I'm trying to see why my applications are crashing, but this is so far the best attempt. I'm just checking a couple things here still. Yeah, I restarted my computer because I tried streaming a few times and it would get like 3 seconds in, something like that. And then I would look over and everything's frozen, and I'm not really sure what's up with that. So, cool. I'm gonna be doing some programming today, so I figured I might as well try streaming a little bit of it. I am working on some stuff to help organize some content for myself. So, for a little bit of background, the stuff I do outside of work, like do a lot of content creation, and something in particular that takes up a lot of time. It's like simple stuff, but it's just like keeping organized with content. And short form videos are one type of content that takes up a lot of time for me. So what I'm trying to do is just write some code to help automatically organize things into spreadsheets. I do a lot of stuff on Google Drive uh, just because I wanted it backed up. I don't want to have to worry about it. And for collaborations and stuff, it's a little bit easier for me to just have things in one spot. So with all that said, I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio here. Let's see, should be this one here. Cool. So that should be all my code on the screen. I do have chat pulled up on the side. I realized that I'm using Restream, and they actually have a dedicated like chat window I can check out. So that's pretty cool. I haven't used it before, but it seems like it's telling me all the details that I think I need to know. So that's cool. And yeah, so let's just dive into it. Feel free to ask stuff in the chat. It's a little bit out of my peripheral, but maybe what I can do is pull it over. That's a lot of chat, isn't it? Let me make that a little smaller. I'm going to put it behind the window that's in the top right. Oh, I guess it's going to be hidden. That's a terrible idea. Okay, well, I'm still learning how to stream, so that's okay. I'll keep it over here, and I'll try to watch if stuff pops up. It's in my left peripheral vision, though, so... Okay, what I'm working on, though, is... Let me back up a little bit here in some of this code. The Google Sheets service class that I'm trying to use is kind of crappy to work with, so... I've been finding... Sorry, I have all this code in one file. This is how I end up prototyping stuff before I pull it all out, but the Sheets service, so I'll just jump into it. The API that this class has is pretty crappy, in my opinion, or at least for how I want to work with stuff. I find that it's not very obvious. So they have a whole bunch of stuff on here. Oh, it's not going to show me all the source. That's okay. But like navigating, let's kind of rewind a little bit. Looking up files and folders and stuff in Google Drive is just a pain in the butt. I think if you're used to like, you know, working with a normal file system on your computer, you want to give it a file path, and like we know that folders don't have extensions but files do, but in Google Drive it's just kind of like not really like that. Everything is, I don't know how it's stored all behind the scenes, but everything has an identifier. So we can conceptualize the, you know, the file folder hierarchy. We know that files are of certain types, but they do a lot of stuff with like inferring the file type from the MIME data. So for example, when you have a file with MIME data, like that it's a JPEG or that it could be a document like a PDF or something, like it uses that to infer the data, like the type of the file. So it doesn't need an extension. And you can, as a result, have files in Google Drive with like no extensions, but it still knows that it's like an Excel sheet kind of thing. So it's just a bit weird to work with, and I think one of the challenges that comes up from that is that you have things like these constructs that we're used to, like I want to go open a file at this path, and you can't just do that in Google Drive. So if I let me find the code for it. Sorry, there's too much. This is what happens when you start prototyping a little bit too far, and you need to start pulling some stuff out. But I want to jump over to this code here. One sec. See, it's already all over. I already pulled some copying stuff out. what I'm doing in this video, by the way, is I want to get to showing you how I'm coming up with some helper methods that I want to reuse. This is one of them. I've actually made a video about this already and a blog post, but this was a helper method that I created so that you can see it's an extension method. So you have the this keyword on this parameter and the static at the front, but the way that this works is that it makes it seem like the drive service lets you look up files and folders by their paths. So for me, this is how I want to be able to go do that kind of stuff. So I wrote this helper method. But now one of the things that I want to do is with Google Sheets. So if I collapse this, trying to figure out where I left off. I'm pretty rattled from all the starting and stopping of the stream, so things are a little bit disorganized here. But it's essentially this code here. So what I'm doing is I wrote this code that will go update a spreadsheet row. And in my opinion, this is like a little bit too... It's not obvious what this code is doing, I feel. And because of that, if I want to go call, I have to go write another spot in my code that I want to go update a spreadsheet row. It's just not obvious. Like, I would go copy and paste this and start having all this kind of crappy code scattered around. So I am trying to pull it into a class that I'm creating that's just called a basic sheet. And a basic sheet starts to make assumptions about the spreadsheet that we're working with, because spreadsheets can be, you know, I know they're just a whole bunch of cells, but whether or not you have like disjoint data in there, like a basic spreadsheet to me is you have a fixed set of columns, you have data in the rows, and you don't have like disjoint data where you have a bunch of gaps between other columns. So you can start making assumptions that it's really just like a basic table. And that's the idea here. So I wrote some helper methods already, but what I want to do is start pulling that code that we were just looking at. I've already lost it, but I think it was right here. I want to start pulling this code into a helper method. So I just copied all of that. I'm going to go into here. I don't know what I want to call it yet. Something like, it's like Copilot is trying to predict what I want to do. I want to call it something like update row contiguous async. And I'm going to explain this in just a second, but the idea is that the data that we have, like I want to update in my spreadsheet a given row. And I know based on my assumptions, right, it's basically a single row in a table. I don't have to worry about all these disjoint cells and stuff. It's literally a bunch of columns with defined headers. And then each row is like an entry in it, right? So cancellation token, try to make sure I always got these put on. And I'm just going to copy and paste that data into here. So this data is all not applicable anymore. But let's see what we got to work with. So I have the Sheets service. So I got that here. We have the spreadsheet ID, so get rid of that. And now we need to know, like, there's a couple things that are hard-coded in here right now. So this is the sheet name. And if I back up a little bit for why this is needed here, the API that exists already through Google's API that they provide, the way that you would go update a given sheet, right? You need to go back to their main class, so this sheet service, it has something called a spreadsheets resource. Then you ask for the values, like, so it's another property on it, and then you can ask to go call an update. But what's weird about this to me is that you can, like, they have a mix of what feels like object-oriented and not, so I can go find and have a reference to a spreadsheet, and I can't call update on that spreadsheet. I can go find and get a reference to a sheet within the spreadsheet, right? Like the different sort of pages that you have in there, but I can't call update. I have to go back and like basically use this root class here. And to me, it's just kind of awkward because if I'm passing around an object that's a sheet that I can go work with, right now I can do some operations with it, but not all. And it just feels very clunky. So What I was doing was passing around this basic sheet object that I created, that had some nice helper methods on it. But as soon as I wanted to go do an update, I couldn't. So I wanted to go, like if we scroll back up, this basic sheet class now, not only it started with just this sheet being passed in, now it needs a reference to its parent spreadsheet, because this doesn't have like a back pointer to this. And neither of these have any back pointer to the sheet service. So if any updates, we have to use this thing. It just feels very clunky. But what I'm doing is putting all of that into this basic sheet class. So to create a basic sheet, you give it all these things, and then it should feel much easier to go use. And this isn't like a totally clean API. Like I'm exposing out those two things again to the outside, just because I don't know yet how I want this all to go look, but it's just a starting point. Okay, so now I've kind of explained why we have to go back to this root part, but the things that we need to be able to pass in, I need to know what you want in terms of the values here. So the different cell values across the row. I need to know what row you want to go update. And we have to be careful too, because row IDs start at 1, but the way it works in code is that they are indexed, right? So if you have an index of 0, you actually want that to be row 1, right? So got to be careful. Off by 1 error is biggest, most common problem in programming, right? And then we have the name of the spreadsheet, or the sheet within the spreadsheet. But we don't need that passed in because we're in a basic sheet class that I've created. We already know what that is. So if I ask for the sheet, oh, I made it a property. So sheet dot, is it just name, title? Come on now, there's got to be something. Oh, I think it's in properties title. Okay. What we're doing is building out this syntax to go address a cell, right? So it would look something like sheet, my goodness, sheet name, then you use an exclamation mark, and then you give it like the range that you would type into like into Excel or Google Sheets. So if you wanted to go from like A32 over to whatever, H32, right? Like that would be one row from columns A to H. This is how you'd have to specify it, because you need to give it the sheet name, because this API, if you just look here, right, we're passing in a spreadsheet ID, but it doesn't know what sheet to go update. So you have to tell it in this range part. So that's what we're building on line 463 here. Okay, so the things that we need passed in are going to be a target row index, right? We don't have that. And then I need to give it the values that we want to have passed in. So probably how I would do this is like, yeah, so target row index. And then what I want to do is something like my read-only list of objects. And just have row data. And then here what I'm going to do is just put, that doesn't like it. Why not? Oh, it doesn't want it to be, oh man, this is silly. I can't give it a read-only list. It has to be a just I list. Yeah, okay. See, this seems weird to me because we're basically telling the person that's calling this, you need to give me a list so that I can mutate, which is wrong. Like, personally, I don't want to mutate any of the data that you're passing in, but the API that they're using here, iList, is mutable. So kind of silly. I don't like that. But what I could do is make it a read-only one passed in, and then I could basically make a new list. But that's just like totally overkill. No one wants that for performance reasons. So kind of like got to give and take a little bit when you're doing this stuff. But at this point, I just want to double check. We're passing in the data for the cells. We already have access to the spreadsheet ID. We have access to the title of the sheet that we want to work with. And we needed the target row index passed in. But what we don't have, this is the part that I figured I was going to have to write an algorithm while I was streaming and I wasn't quite ready. So this will be fun. And actually, this is the kind of thing that I am very bad at. So it might be kind of cool for you guys to see. Like, I'm uncomfortable doing this kind of stuff, and I'm going to be doing it live. So to explain, what I need to do is know which like letters for the cells that we want to work with, right? It's not so complicated. So if you, I'm missing another piece of data that I'll explain in just a second, but if you had, say, this list of data that was passed in, if that was 5 different elements, let's say, right? If you were starting from the beginning, you would want to do cell like, let's pretend the target row index is 3, right? You would go A3, B3, C3, D3. How many did I say? And then E3, right? Like if it were 5 things passed in for this row data. So I need to be able to increment the letters. Now, in my case, I don't want to go into like the double digit letters and stuff. Like I'm not releasing this to the public for other people to consume. It's just kind of like I'm using it. So I'm going to go from A to Z, or Z, I guess. I'm living in the US now. I have to say Z. So we'll go from A to Z, but I probably want the ability to provide an offset. So int starting column index. Thank you, Copilot. Now I have to go figure out the start and the end value here. And maybe this is actually pretty easy because I can cheat a little bit, but we can do something like, so I need to do a char start column letter. Okay, thank you, Copilot, for making my life so easy. The reason I said I was going to cheat a little bit is because I was going to do some casting and use a character. I know the starting character at position 0 is going to be A, right? So if you add 0 onto A and cast that to a char, again, you're going to get A. And I'm just going to press enter and see if Copilot can figure out that I want to get the end character now. Yeah, I think that's pretty close. I can probably simplify this a little bit, right? Like, I don't need that. And let's see, I just want to double check this because it's like an off by 1 thing. I don't know why it has this on here. If we had one thing in, okay, no, that makes sense. If we had one item in the row data, right? If we had one item in the row data, I don't need to have an end column of B, right? So that will, oops, that -1 is accounting for that. If I had 2 things in the row data, it means that I have to have column A as the start, right? Because we'd say column, say the starting index is 0, right? So this would be A. This would also be A. It's the same variable. And then if we had 2 elements in here, it would be 2 minus 1. So 1 added on to A would give us B. So A would be the starting cell and B would be the ending one. So we get 2. So I think that works. And that means that I can put them in here. And you're going to start to see how ridiculous this is to go read. So I'm going to see about doing a bit of readability refactoring here because sure, it's all on one line, right? But that's kind of crap. So to start, an easy way is just to say target range. Right? This is still a terrible line. I don't want to look at this. It's awful. Now, what I might do just to spruce it up a little bit is something like, I haven't really played around with this yet, so like this might be okay for readability in my opinion. This is awful, but like whatever. It's a one-liner. You need to have this on here, and there's different options. I should be clear, right? You don't have to use raw. You can do user entered or some of these other things, but I'm just using raw for now. The point is that this line looks pretty ugly, but this is a pretty helpful method now. So I think that I'm happy with that. Now what that means is I can go back to where it was called. Right, there's a lot of code in here, so I haven't, like I was saying at the beginning of this stream, I'm prototyping something right now, so I'm just rapidly creating like interfaces and classes, dropping them into one file. But like, I've been doing this for a little bit this morning, and I absolutely have to go clean this up. So This is the basic sheet factory. That's not what I wanted to see. I want to go to the basic sheet. Oh, my goodness, sorry. We were just there. So I want to go to the video destination. And the context, again, if you're joining, the context is that I'm trying to do some helper code for working with some of my my content for social media to organize videos, because I keep track of stuff in spreadsheets and on Google Drive. So this is the code that we were basically refactoring out to go reuse. So what I'm going to do is we have the sheet passed in, and now we can use this. Awesome. And we have a target row index. The column that we want to start at is B, right? So what index is B? That's index 1, because index 0 would be column A. Now we go to the row data, which, nope, Copilot, you're failing me. It's going to be this data here. We'll pull that. What else do we need? Cancellation token, and we're done. Cool. I don't really need configure await false. I just, because I'm not building a UI application, but I am in a habit of always doing it just so I don't ever forget. And I think if I do that, there we go. It's a little bit better. I kind of like doing this, though. Personal preference. Now, could I pull this variable out, or this list out right into a new variable? Sure, I could go do that. I don't really care at this point, though. This is feeling okay. So I'm feeling okay about that. What else has to happen here? So, oh, there's another spot. The reason I started refactoring this in the first place is there was a second spot that I needed to do some updates to. And it's not in here, so it's not the video destination, it's the video source, because I'm reorganizing videos. So I was moving the video, so that was copied elsewhere. Now I'm saying, hey, look, I'm done. I want to go delete it. So I should be able to go delete it. That's what all this is going to do. And I can walk through that in just a sec. I wanted to paste this stuff in here. I don't have the target row index, so I'm going to have to find a way to track that. I don't have it at this point in time. And this is kind of neat. So start at 1. Okay, so anyway, this code up here, if you're curious what this does, like I was saying earlier on this stream, you might have just joined as well, but the way that the Drive API works is that we usually cannot just give it a file path. We have to be able to refer to things by their IDs. And that's kind of challenging because I think a lot of the time we're used to thinking about things with file paths, right? Like if you're working on your desktop or laptop computer, you got stuff in a folder, you know the path to it, but that's not what we have here. So we have to be thinking about that when you're working with Google Drive. So I made a helper API that basically allows us to work with file paths, because that's how my brain works. I don't want to have to readjust my way of thinking to work with an API. I'd rather put a layer in between that I can translate, kind of do it once, right? Pay the price, and then I can think about it how I like to think about it. So this is an example of where it's not a good API. Like, it would be nice for me to have a delete method, like a delete extension method, where I can give it a file path, and all that it would do behind the scenes is this kind of thing. It would go look for it and then pass in the result into here. So, I mean, we could go try doing that, actually. That might be kind of neat. So I'm going to jump. This is just an extension method. So we could go do, let's see. And by the way, this is the kind of stuff, like, I'm doing this for my own projects. I know that I use Google Sheets a lot and Google Drive a lot for content creation in particular. So this is a bit of me exploring around and playing. Like, if you were doing this kind of stuff at work, I would say, like, if you don't need this, don't go waste the time doing it, right? Like, there's definitely trade-offs, but you don't want to go down a rabbit hole of just like, oh, I'm going to go build 50 different APIs I'm never going to use. But part of this is, like, I'm creating content. I'm I'm trying to practice using some of these so that I can speak about them better. And I'm building some stuff for some internal tools that are going to help me. So sometimes I'm doing stuff and I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily like recommend you always do that, but it's just how I do it. So I want to back up a little bit here because I have a bit of a pattern. I don't like throwing exceptions, so I have my own kind of stuff going on here. But do I need to return anything? I don't know. So one sec, let's see. It's going to be something like this. We actually want this whole same thing. Might as well take all of that. It's just the return type I'm not sure about yet, so I'll explain this in just a moment. But this is the part that I'm not sure if I have a return type yet. But anyway, let's see. Do I have all my stuff matched? No, local paths, return a value, sure. Okay, so we have drive service. That's going to replace this. And technically we want to call this up front. So, oh, Copilot was about to do it. There we go. Cool is that, right? I just have to like start typing something and press tab and it knows what I'm trying to do. So I don't know if this returns, it does return a string. Okay, I mean, we could, I don't know what that string's supposed to be. The result object. Okay. So let's return that. Oh. Okay, and I need a name, but let me explain what's going on here because this is kind of wild. I mentioned I don't like throwing exceptions, and I will do basically whatever I can to write code to try and prevent that. But there's going to be situations where I'm interacting with external services, things I don't have control over, and even if they say like, "Oh, this API can throw these," oh my god, that's a good yawn. I guess I'm still tired. Even if these APIs say, like, I only throw this type of exception, like, I don't know if that's always true. Like, I have trust issues, right? So I like to be defensive when I'm coding against integrations. And that's because an exception in some integration should not be critical malfunctioning behavior in my application, like, almost all of the time. I don't want to say that as a rule. I don't like using absolutes, right? But most of the time, if someone else's service is causing a problem, like in the scope or the context of their service, I don't want that to destroy what I got going on. So instead of trying to pretend like I can catch every single possible exception, because they could miss one in their documentation, what I do is I wrap some of this calling code in a helper method I've created, which is literally, it's just a try catch. It's just a try catch behind the scenes. And it lets me write this kind of syntax where I can say that I have a method and then I'm going to safely get a result or an exception. So it's a try catch, but the other thing that it does is that it has, I didn't copy it properly, but I have a return type, which is like the result of trying something. So I probably could use a better name. I kind of just like started using this to see if it would work, and it started working really well for me and then never changed the name. So the idea that happens here is that when I wrap stuff with a safely call, it will try to get me the result or an exception. So what do they call them? Discriminant unions. It's like we don't have that in C#. This is basically like the one-of library. We don't have that as like a first-class thing in C#, but this is my result type object that I've made, and this is a helper method that when I wrap stuff in it, basically gives me that functionality for free. So that means if the drive API throws an exception or something and I'm not handling it properly in here, so I could still put try catches in here if I need to, like a file not found kind of thing, or you lose internet connection, whatever. I could go handle those things gracefully in here, but this is my catch-all. Right? If something goes wrong, then I'm not going to blow up everything else outside of here because I shouldn't need to. But I also name these things kind of like how Microsoft has built-in try methods. They usually do like try something and then you output the result. But I don't need to output the result if I'm using this. And the other benefit is, say you do have like a try parse method, right? If you have a try parse method, it won't throw exceptions, but it also doesn't tell you why it couldn't parse. It just says false. So I like these result types because I can use an exception. I can say like something went wrong or this is invalid. I can put that into an exception object without throwing it. So I think it lets me pass more context around. I don't know why I'm so tired today. I slept in pretty good. I haven't had caffeine yet, and if you've been following anything that I've been posting in my vlogs, I'm actually doing like a caffeine, not a detox, but I have a caffeine problem in general. So I am trying to reduce the amount of caffeine I have in a day because it was as high, like as high as over a gram of caffeine in a day for years. And like that's obviously problematic. So now I'm paying the consequences of trying to wean myself off of caffeine. So I'm down to 400 milligrams in a day, which is still a lot, but that's a huge reduction. But I'm also trying to not have caffeine right upon waking, and I notice it. Delete file async. What did I call this one for path? Okay, I think something like this will do the trick mostly. But what's not done well here is, I'll show you some other cool things about this if this works. I should be able to do, oh, it doesn't let me. That's right. I need to pass it in. So forget I said that, but we need to check this. So if the source file result success is not true, because we have a Boolean flag that lets us check that, we would just return it. We could return the error. Copilot does not know that. But can I also just return this? Technically, I could go to an error anyway. But now this is confused. Okay. So let me walk you through what's happening here. I wrap it in this safely call. That means we basically have a try catch, and I can get a tried X return type. It's just a result type around this whole thing. First thing I try to do is go find the file with that path. If I find it, sorry, if I don't find it, return an error, right? It could be file not found, whatever. But it's not going to crash. You can just check to see. What's kind of interesting about this one is, like, I'm pretty sure the built-in system IO stuff, if you say delete a file and it's not there, I don't know if it's this file not found or if it's just like, sure, like it's not there. That's the result you wanted, right? You wanted the file to not be there, like thumbs up and you're good to go. So I can't recall what the behavior is, but that might be something kind of interesting. Almost like a try-state thing. But anyway, once we have it, we basically can go call the delete part here. And that's really all that there is for this method. That means now I have a nice helper method. If I go back to here, I can just say drive. I can give it the path, which was here. Sorry, one sec. There we go. Cancellation token. Configure await. Coming together. Right? It's a little bit more clean. Now, all of that work just to get this, like, yeah, kind of silly maybe, but I feel like this is definitely more readable. But the reality is, like, am I ever going to write code again that's going to delete stuff based on a path from Google Drive? The answer is I know that I'm going to. So I know that I'm doing a bit of like looking ahead to know, like, that's an investment in some of my code that'll be coming up. So I like to pause for this kind of stuff because I know that I'm working on a personal hobby project for this, right? And I like trying to make things relatable for work. The tricky thing is, like, sometimes I might be doing things or giving advice that's like context dependent. Actually, everything is context dependent. So if you see me going and doing this refactoring and I'm kind of setting things up, like I want you to keep in mind that like that could or could not be a good idea where you're working, right? If you're not sure, like I would just say have conversations about it. What you don't want to be doing at work is just wasting time on stuff that's not a priority, because you might think that there's value in it, but if your team, your product owner, whoever else, if they don't find that there's also value in it, especially compared to your other priorities, like then it's not a good use of your time. So if you think that it is, you should go communicate that. If you're just off going and coding random things because you're like, oh, this is definitely going to be of value, like I said, if no one else agrees with you, it's going to, like, you're going to feel awkward about it because you're going to be trying to say afterwards, well, I did all of this. Like, isn't this helpful? And someone might say, sure, it's helpful, but like, at what cost? Now we couldn't go do these other things because you were off doing whatever you were doing. So I urge you, because there's a lot of different advice about this that people post about. I just urge you to not go rogue and go make changes. I think that's like the most simple way I can put it. If you find like if your mindset is the only way I can get the stuff done that I want is that I have to not tell anyone and go do it, I would say, well, you might be the problem. Like, you might be the problem, right? You might say, well, my product owner doesn't listen to me, my team doesn't listen to me. Like, I don't know, like, you might need to work on your communication. I'm not saying that they don't, right? I'm not saying that, but if you're not getting the buy-in that you think that you need to go do stuff, therefore you have to go behind their backs, you probably want to think about this a little bit more. Like, your communication and collaboration skills may need to come up so that you don't have to go rogue to go do stuff. And I think people don't want to hear that. But like, I think it's true. So now that we've gotten this far, we can delete the file that I have now copied. I didn't show you the copying part, but that gets copied. Now we can delete the original. I could have used a move, but the reason I didn't want to use a move is that I'm kind of thinking in like a transactional way. I need to do a couple of things before I move this file, because if this fails anywhere in between, I need the file to move back. So I'd rather take the overhead of using a bit of extra space, go copy it, an extra API call, like, okay, now go delete it. But at least it's a little bit safer for what I'm doing. Okay, so gets copied. Now we delete the original. Excellent. And then I needed to be able to track some data into the sheet that I'm working in. And I think I'm missing some information about that, because it's not just the source video data that I have to work with. I'm trying to figure out what part of the code I wrote finds that, because I wrote it earlier today, but I moved a lot of stuff around. I think it's in the video destination part, so let me collapse this again. I think the video destination finds that target row. And that means, okay, I think I know what that means. Target row index is found only at this point. That means that it's not going to be on the source video data, because source video data ends up getting turned into transact video data, which ends up getting converted into result video data. So the only thing that can store this information so far at this point, if I continue this pattern, is this. So I need to have something else added onto here. Now that's passed in, but it means that this, and I don't need these interfaces. Actually, let me explain that in just a moment, because I think that's a kind of a cool one to go over. Video source. So when I go to complete it, it's results. There we go. I'm just going to call it video data to keep it simple. That means if I go into this API is now incorrect. I wanted video data. Let me just get this back to sort of like compiling, and then I want to go explain the interfaces, because I think it's kind of neat. Video data, source, no, it's transact. Okay. And now I can say video data, target row index. Excellent. We did it. Great success. Okay. Save that. Oh, cool. There's some comments coming in. Sorry, these are a little delayed in the chat. The one of the comments is in a language I can't read, so I apologize. Cool. And now another one just rolled in. yeah. Let me answer these. Hi, what can you do if your PO tries every solution in the world except for the one you know is the correct answer? Okay, Sergio. So it's a communication thing, right? So let's walk. I don't have all the context for your situation, right? And I need to be careful when we talk through these kinds of things. I do this even with people that I mentor at work, right? Every situation has multiple different perspectives into it. So I need to be careful that when you are telling me something, I need to acknowledge and also say back to you, like, this is one side of the story, right? I'm not trying to be against you. I just want to be very clear when we talk about these types of things that there are different perspectives, right? You are experiencing one of these in this scenario. Your product owner and other people on the team will have different perspectives as well. So let's call that out just to begin with so that you don't feel like I'm like coming after you or something like that, right? And I also don't just want to side up with you because that's not going to be helpful. I want to try to get to the root of what's happening here. So what can you do if your PO tries every solution in the world except for the one you know is the correct answer? So if I back up from this, it sounds like when you're working with your product owner, they are approaching solving problems or going down paths like saying, hey, team, let's go in this direction. And it seems to be not things that you are aligned with. Now, what I don't know is like what process is in place to be able to solicit the ideas, right? So I don't know how the PO is doing that. I don't know the ways that you are presenting those ideas. I don't know how those conversations are going. So maybe you're presenting them, and so you've had the opportunity to share, but at the end of that, the PO is not getting the value out of that, right? So there's a couple other details. You can continue to add them to the chat if you want so that I'm not going off the rails here explaining it. But ultimately, I'd say first thing, you need to make sure you have the opportunity to be able to discuss those ideas with the team and your PO so that you have a chance to be heard. Obviously, right, if you're not getting a chance to be heard, you will always feel frustrated by this. Let me switch my camera over too, by the way. One sec. I feel like I'm talking in code, but here we go. This is me. So having the chance to be in front of the PO is important, and your teammates, because this is going to tie into some of the next part, but like it's all about like it's not all about this, but a big part of it is being able to sell your ideas, right? You need to be in a position where your idea can be conveyed to someone and they can understand the value of it. The reason I wanted to back up and say it's not all about that is because it's very possible, and more often than not, our ideas are not the best ideas, even though we feel that way. Generally, what happens is we have ideas that could be good, but not best. And other people also have good ideas, but not best. And when we come together and talk about those things, that's where we come up with, again, maybe not the best, but a better version of those ideas, right? We can take bits and pieces, we can have better understanding from different perspectives and move forward on that. So, where am I going with this? Get in front of the PO, get in front of your team, right? If you have ideas about how things should be working, whether they're implementation, direction, strategy, whatever it happens to be, one of the best things that you can do is get buy-in from other people on the team. And I say this not because it's like, it's not about like being manipulative, right? You're not like trying to like sneak in on the team and be like, hey, I got this good idea, and like, can I get your vote? Like, not necessarily like that. I'm obviously being a little bit facetious here, but the idea is not to like try and manipulate people to side with you, because part of it is you need to vet whether or not your idea is good in the first place. And this is hard because, like I said, we're usually like, man, I got this good idea. Like, I'm pretty confident this is the way to go. But like, how do you know? You might have data, but do you have all the data? I'm not saying your team has all the data, but a good way to go about things is getting feedback from people on the team. So that might mean talking with someone more senior, a peer, someone who's kind of working in the same area or has seen some things before and saying, hey, like I got some information, some details about this. I got some thoughts. What do you think about this, right? Having a small conversation, picking their brain, doing that with one or two people, and then going, cool, like now I might be in a position where I can articulate this better, right? I've had this conversation with a couple people, seen things a bit different. I don't know, this is different on every team, like design doc, like one pager, whatever that happens to be. If you have meetings where you can just bring this stuff up. But however that works in your team, and if it doesn't work, maybe come up with some new ideas you can propose. But finding a way to capture those thoughts, and this is where the selling part comes in, you want to be able to articulate the value of what you're proposing to the target audience. If the target audience, in this case, is the PO, because now you've kind of gotten some feedback from your peers, target audience is the PO, how do you convince the PO that this is a good idea? And the goal, again, is not at the end of the day. The goal at the end of the day is not to say, hey, look, I was right. We picked my idea. Victory, right? The goal at the end of the day is, hey, our business is doing better and our customers are happy. That's it. Like, there is no you in that equation, right? You are part of the business is going to do better, and our customers are happy. If that means that your idea was selected, great. That's cool. If your idea was not selected, that's okay too. But you should feel comfortable leaving that and saying, hey, I understand why the business went in this direction. So when you need to sell ideas to the PO, again, it's not to be able to say, hey, look, I won. It's to be able to say, product owner, I need to understand the things that you value and prioritize. This is also on the product owner, and I would say your engineering manager, to be able to convey the value of the business to the engineers. Because if there's misalignment there, that causes a lot of friction, right? That happens a lot with tech debt, I'd say. Like, engineers are very much like, hey, like, we got to fix this, we got to fix this. And sometimes product owners are like, no, we don't. And people go, well, we can't leave the code like this. And someone will say, the code's been like that for 10 years and no one's complained. So yeah, we can. Like, it literally has not been a problem. So context, but moral of the story is communication, I think, is what it comes down to. The context is important. Let me know if you have any more thoughts or questions on that. Like, if you have other details and you're like, hey, like, this might help, maybe we can steer it back, add it to the chat. I'm happy to kind of go back to it, okay? Configure await significance on performance. Okay, so configure await false. This is a really messy one. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to explain it properly, so I apologize. Let me go back to the code. It's funny, I bought this Elgato Stream Deck, and it's sitting beside me, and I don't know what buttons to press, so I'm just like kind of flopping around here trying to switch stuff. I got to get better at the streaming thing, but that'll come. So it should be this one here. Cool. So you see this type of thing with configure await. Okay, what does configure await mean? Why do we do it? Well, configure await, what it does is allows you, especially with false, by the way, so configure await allows you to tell the scheduler, once you are done awaiting and given context back so we can continue execution, what thread should I be on? This sounds kind of weird. If you have configure, if you omit it, when you resume, it will be whatever thread started this call, right? So if you're about to run line 261 and you were on thread A, if you didn't have this, as soon as this has been awaited and come back and you can keep executing, you'll be back on thread A. Now, configure await false allows you to say, I don't care what thread resumes the work after. If that means that a different thread that's freed up from the scheduler can go do it, that's fine. So where this comes up a lot, and by the way, that might not be fully accurate. I'm just trying to give you some things to kind of consider, because if you want to go read about this more, please do. I recommend it. because async await can get a little bit complex. By a little bit, I mean a lot of it, as soon as you start diving into things. But where this comes up a lot is especially with user interface applications. So WinForms, WPF, Maui, like anything where you're dealing with a user interface, this becomes very critical. I'm not saying it's the only place, but it becomes very critical there because there is a scheduler that has to figure out things like the main thread for user interface updates. If you have only been programming in web applications, for example, this might not be obvious, but when you're doing user interface applications, there is one main thread that's responsible for painting and updating the user interface. And this is just a pattern that's been used for basically forever. I don't know all the details behind why, but I think it has to do with essentially listening for like operating system updates and the way that a lot of that can work. So things like getting click events and keyboard events. I don't know how that has not evolved more over time, but historically, I believe that's where it comes from, like this message pump. And from there, you have this one thread for your main thread. If you want to go do async stuff, now what happens is if you had a button to click, right? So you click a button. Let's pretend this is an event handler for a button, okay? If you click the button, you might want to go do some work, right? Asynchronously. If you didn't have configure await, so let's pretend this is gone on this line here, it would mean that once this came back, line 260 would start on the main thread, because if you had main thread here, you would also have main thread here. Okay, and sometimes this is really important for user interface applications, because if this code was about to go update the user interface, you would really want to make sure that this was still running on the main thread. Because if not, like I was saying, you might not know this if you haven't worked in user interface applications, but it would say like a cross-thread exception, like it would crash your program. So you need to make sure that it comes back on your main thread for a user interface update. If it was still more background work, you might not care. So, oops, let me put that back. If you put configure await in, you're saying, I don't care what thread picks up the work after. Just like start going. So this can be really helpful if you truly don't care what thread is picking this up. So a lot of the time when we're dealing with, you'll see the advice around this is like, if you are building library code, then try to use configure await. And the reason they say that is because library code could be consumed by a user interface application. And you can get more effectiveness out of that by not kind of saying, oh, go keep doing this on the main thread. It's like, just let me do this work on whatever thread is available to do it. So the scheduler has more freedom, right? But you don't want that freedom always in a user interface application. So you need to make sure that you're running user interface updates on the right thread. So I hope that helps a little bit. It's a little bit confusing. Even the C# course I put out on Dome Train, I have to start plugging more of my stuff, right? But I have a deep dive course on Dome Train for C#, and I talk about async await. I don't think I go into the configure await stuff in detail because it's like, it's not just like a service level thing. You have to really get into like understanding why. So in ASP.NET Core applications, I think the way that the scheduling works anyway is that it's not going to force resuming on the same thread. It just kind of picks any thread, I believe. So like there is no advantage, as far as I understand, there's no advantage to having configure await false in an application like this. But like I said, I get in the habit of doing it because if I go refactor stuff out into a shareable library, it's already done. I don't have to go, oh crap, let me go find all of these async calls and put configure await false on them. So I just kind of saved myself for that. Okay, at this point, I don't have the details, I don't think, for what I want to put here. This is going to be marking the completed one. I have to think about my spreadsheet schema, and I don't want to necessarily just pull it all up on stream because I don't want all my private details showing. But I have a column. I just don't know which one it is. And this is going to be an interesting one too, because I need to say what column I want to start at. Actually, this will be fine. So I think all that I need to do in this one is update one single cell, and I don't know which column. So I have this column that's like something like last updated time or something like that. And what I'm going to need to do is figure out what index that is. It's not 1. It might be something like 5 or something like that. And then I would want to do... I should be clear here. Almost always I use UTC when I'm building stuff. But, and the reason for that is because you don't know what time zone you're in. So kind of just normalize to UTC. Especially if you're dealing with like web applications and different geographies. However, the difference here is that what I'm doing for my own application is like I'm only using Google Sheets because it's a really convenient way for me to like not go open up a database. I forgot I was going to go back and talk about the interfaces. Let me explain this one, and then we're going to talk about the interfaces because it's a good segue. I don't want UTC though because I want to work in my local time, and I'm not in UTC. So that's why I'm doing it this way. I want hours, minutes, and seconds as well. So I have this cell basically that tracks whether or not this work has been done. I have to go find out which position it is, so I'll go do that later. But I'm just going to write in when I finish doing this work. Pretty simple, but I have to come back to this. At this point, the workflow that I was trying to build is done because I have deleted a file that I copied, which was earlier in the workflow, and this cell I was actually using to see if there's no entry there, then I know that I need to go run this code. So now I can say, mark this one is done, and this is really like a flag in a spreadsheet that says, you've done this work already, or you don't have to revisit it again. Okay. Let's talk about these interfaces before I forget one more time. So what came up earlier while I was streaming here was I said, these are kind of dumb, kind of overkill, kind of pointless now, but I wanted to talk about where they came from. I don't need to be in code. I want to talk with my hands a little bit. So let me go back to here. You can see my pretty face. So the idea was that I've been talking about how I have stuff in Google Drive, right? I have a Google Sheet to track stuff. I have files in Google Drive. And when I went to go write this code, I said, I know that I need to go write code that will go work with Google Drive, Google Sheets. What are you working on today? Hey, well, welcome. Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you just joined, obviously you wouldn't have got it, but I'm just talking about building a tool for myself to help with social media content organization, because in particular for short form videos, I use Google Sheets, Google Drive for this kind of stuff. It's pretty tedious for me. There's a lot of moving stuff around, and I'm just writing a program that's going to help me do that automatically. So I can basically put the files in the right spot to start with, mark them in a spreadsheet, and then it will go move them to where they need to be. So it's like an auto-organizing thing. The particular details about why I'm doing that, I'm not really including here. It's not really important, but I'm spending time explaining the Google Sheets and Google Drive APIs and how I'm trying to navigate those to make them a little bit more clean. So hopefully that helps, but if you have more questions about what's going on in the stream, just let me know. And I wanted to talk about the fact that, I mean, those are the current sources of data that I have. But I don't think that I want them to be the storage and organization mechanism indefinitely. Like, I am trying to plan and think about different ways to move away from those things, because there's some other integrations that become very manual for me to go do with respect to my content. So the challenge is like, yes, Google Sheets and Google Drive have been awesome because I can do it from my phone. I can do whatever I need to do. It's like, it's human readable, right? I can make updates. I can type stuff in. I don't have to go connect to a database and go, do queries and stuff like that. It's just super easy as a user. And it seems kind of funny, right? Because like, if I'm building systems, like, why would I not go use a database? It's because it wasn't a system. But now that it's starting to become a system, I have this situation where I have all of this information in Google Drive. And if I want to start doing more integrations with things and better organization, I may want to move away from that. So the reason that I started creating interfaces in the code was I was thinking, do I need to start planning for basically like a data source or a data destination that's not going to be Google Drive and Google Sheets? So for example, I'm using Google Sheets right now for some of the metadata about the shorts, but what if I wanted to move that to MongoDB or a SQL database? Like, I was thinking, if I go to write this code, I should probably consider that it could have a different type of destination. Now, the challenge that I noticed right away, so I put the interfaces in place, and I was like, all of the data that I need to work with is so specific to Google Sheets and Google Drive, and I don't even know how to build this yet. I'm basically jumping the gun to trying to put like an interface in place, because it's not going to have the right pieces on it. So for example, the concept, you saw me, or unless you just joined, you didn't see this, but I had to find and track a row ID that I want to go update. And that was done earlier in the process. But the concept of that row ID to go update makes literally no sense if I want to go move to a different data source. Right? It just doesn't make sense. Or if you have something like a starting source that is Google Sheets and Google Drive, and an ending like destination that would be, I'm just going to make this up. Maybe I want to even store the videos in MongoDB as well. Whatever, right? Pick anything you want. But it's not Google Drive and Google Sheets. Now I have these two things going on. I need to make sure that like the way I would want to design this is that they don't care about where the source is. Right? They shouldn't care about the other pieces, but I'm not in a position where I can go build a system to be swappable components yet. And that's really what I wanted to get to is I think in the future I want to be able to swap out the components here, but I don't know enough about the system I'm building to have swappable components. So that's why I started with the interfaces and quickly was like, it's not going to be a good fit. Just get it working for now. I can always refactor it later. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to go over for today because I just wanted to get that part working. So I'm not planning on streaming anymore for today just because like I still got to eat breakfast. Like maybe that's why I'm yawning. I just kind of woke up and started doing this. For sure. And by the way, before I end the stream or whatever, does anyone else have questions? The chat and stuff's a little bit delayed, but I'll hang out here for just a moment and let anyone ask. If you want to ask anything else about either what you saw or just C# or software engineering or your career, like let me know because I'm happy to hang around a little bit longer, but the content that I wanted to go over is already done. So just let me know, but I'll be quiet and stare at the camera and you let me know if there's anything else you want to hear. So I still see a few people hanging on to the stream here, so let me know. Oh, sure. Okay. So one question, can learning C# itself be enough to apply at Microsoft? I'm starting your course on Downtrain. Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoy the course. Thank you for checking that out. I would say like it's a tricky question, right? Like Microsoft obviously is very heavy into C#, but there's a bit of a loaded thing that you use there, and it says, or sorry, you said like is it enough to apply at Microsoft? And I would say it's actually not even required to apply at Microsoft, which is why this question is tricky to answer. So a lot of the time, I think people hyper focus on languages or tech stacks, and I think those can be very helpful. By the way, this is going to be very generic advice, and there's going to be situations where this absolutely doesn't apply. It's impossible to give universal advice that's accurate, so I need to give that disclaimer, right? My experience has been that with smaller companies with less budget, where, say, I'll give you an example, 10 people at a company, they hire one more, right? That's 10% of their workforce, right? They're adding 10% of their workforce with one person. It makes a huge difference for that person to be up and running as fast as possible. So it's a lot more challenging for a small company to be able to afford ramping people up in technology and things like that. It's not that they can't do it or that they shouldn't, but like from a business perspective, it's very challenging to be able to support that. Maybe they have a lot of investment money and they can afford to do it, cool. But if you're like self-funded, maybe you're still trying to get, you're still trying to get the like revenue from users and be profitable. If you put yourself in that situation, like we know we need to add a developer onto the team, you're going to be picky about trying to find someone who can just hit the ground running and get into it. So I think especially for smaller companies, it makes a much bigger difference if you are right into the tech stack. Again, not a requirement, but I would just imagine from their perspective, it's easier to bring someone on that has that versus, sure, we're going to spend 3 months ramping you up in a language you've never used. Okay, so disclaimer, it's not all companies. Certainly when I was hiring people at the startup I was working at before, if you didn't know C#, but you knew Python, Java, like C++, like if you could program, that's really all I cared about, because on my team in particular, I would spend time mentoring people in languages and stuff. So, we could accommodate it. But that's kind of start of that. I know you're focused on Microsoft, so let's talk about that for a sec. The two teams that I've been on at Microsoft, neither of them I have done hiring for, because I have been part of the hiring of the team expansion. So they were like, we're going to scale this team. We need an engineering manager. So they would hire the people and the engineering manager, me. So I didn't do the hiring. But what I can tell you is most, if not all of the people, I actually think I might be able to say all of the people that were hired on to my teams as part of me being hired, none of them knew C#. This is at Microsoft across 2 different teams. So what does that mean? Doesn't mean that they couldn't learn it. Doesn't mean that they can't program. It just means that they didn't need to have that skill. And that's because, and I wasn't in those interviews, but the people that were interviewing were able to gauge, look, this person has enough technical depth, right? They have experience in programming languages that are not totally random. So they should be able to apply those skills into C#. They know that there's a ramp up period in the space we're in. So like, sure, they can demonstrate these technical skills in these languages. We can spend the time ramping them up. So that's really how it panned out. That's a big belief of mine too, is like, you don't need to know a particular language. We can spend the time teaching you. It's really about mindset, I would say, is a bigger thing. So if you're not coachable, you're not open to learning things, like that becomes a challenge, because then if you don't have the skill set, how do we expect to teach you? So to answer your question a little bit more succinctly, I think it's very helpful to have a C# background, because odds are you'll probably be using C#. You do want to check the jobs that you're applying for. So I get, of course, like as someone who works at Microsoft, people are always like, hey, like, can you refer me? Like where can I, like, what teams, like, can you hire me on this team? Like, what teams are hiring? Like, I'm not hiring, and the only spot that I tell people to go, because it's true, is the careers page, right? Check the job postings there. Watch for different job postings, but check to see what kind of skills they're looking for. C# is going to be helpful. There's no doubt, right? So I would say, like, and thank you again for doing my courses. I do appreciate that. I think it will be helpful. Is it mandatory? No. It's just not, because we've seen time and time again that if you know a programming language, you can get ramped up in another one. So a lot of the concepts, right? So the world ventures, right? The concepts that you would be learning from these things. If I'll give you another example. I don't know your background. So if C# was your first programming language, then I think you're doing the right stuff. If you're like, I already know Java, I already know Python, I've done some C++, or whatever combination of these things, right? If you're like, I know how to program, I understand object-oriented programming, I would say, like, if you're proficient in a language, that's really what you're going to need in the first place to kind of get by the technical part. Okay, so it is your first language. So yeah, if that's your first language, then I think you're, like I said, I think you're doing the right stuff then, right? The fact that you picked C# as the first one, and Microsoft is aligned with C# because it's their language, I think that's great. Now, did it have to be C#? It didn't have to be in order to be able to have a chance at Microsoft. Just, I think that's what I'm trying to draw some perspective around. So I do think it helps, just not required. Does that help answer your question? I realize there's also like a ridiculous delay with the stream and stuff, so sorry. So awesome. Okay, well, I'm glad that helps. Cool. Great. I think that's it for the stream then. So thanks for the questions. I appreciate it. I am going to be streaming again on Monday night Pacific time, so 9:30 Pacific. That's what I've been doing for the past few weeks. This one was a little bit unique. I just wanted to program this morning, and I have to record YouTube videos today, so I figured let's get comfortable in front of the camera before making some tutorials. And yeah, I hope this is kind of fun. So thanks again. And if you can join me Monday, that'll be awesome. It'll be the same idea, but I'm probably not doing code. I'll be doing more of an AMA. So if you didn't get a chance to ask questions here, Monday's your chance. If you want to submit questions and stuff ahead of time, add comments onto any post you want. Find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. Send me messages and let me know. Thank you so much. I will see you Monday, hopefully.